And we begin tonight with the 43-day sprint to November 5th. And if you're feeling kind of tense, not super loose, you are not alone. I think everyone who is paying any amount of attention to this election is some combination of excited, anxious, and thoroughly freaked out. But we have officially entered the period where the election isn't coming, it is here. It's happening, y'all, and in a few weeks, just a few weeks, we will find out if this country will face another Trump administration, with all that means for the future of our democracy, including mass deportation and Project 2025 and whatever it is J.D. Vance would do with executive branch power, or if we will turn the page to a Kamala Harris, Tim Walz administration. In a number of states, people are already voting, so we're already getting scenes like these long lines of early voters in Virginia. But the early voting process has not gone off without some hitches. In Montana, the state had to shut down the site that generates electronic ballots for overseas voters due to a pretty big screw-up. Kamala Harris's name was left off the ballot. Donald Trump, RFK Jr., and the Libertarian candidate, a guy named Chase Oliver, all got on the ballot, but not the sitting vice president of the United States. Funny. I wonder who that vendor is. In other states, like Georgia, lawsuits are being filed already challenging the way elections are being run. We will all be up on pins and needles on November 5th, or whenever the Peach State finishes hand counting the millions of ballots that will likely be generated. However in the world they're going to do that. And whether lawsuits will prevent whoever wins these states where Republican election deniers have a role from being certified in their state elections at all. North Carolina politics, meanwhile, has been turned upside down by the salacious and bizarre revelations last week that the current Lieutenant Governor, Mark Robinson, who is the Republican nominee for governor, not only allegedly frequented porn sites, he also hung out in the chat rooms as a character called Mini Soldier, making wild pronouncements, calling himself a black Nazi, disparaging MLK and saying slavery was a good thing and that he'd buy a few slaves himself if he could. Also, that he enjoys the transgender porn and some other stuff I won't even repeat on cable. Robinson has denied the allegations, but over the weekend, most of his campaign staff quit, leaving him with a skeletal team, along with Donald Trump's continued endorsement. Although, when Trump campaigned in North Carolina on Saturday, he did not repeat that Robinson is Dr. King on steroids or even mention him at all. On a national level, Kamala Harris's campaign continues to be nothing short of a juggernaut, meanwhile, raising more than twice as much money as the Trump-Vance campaign and overwhelming them on the ground in swing states. New polling shows Harris gaining more popularity in the past few weeks than any candidate in the 35-year history of the NBC Wall Street Journal poll. She's gone from a 3250 deficit to a 4845 positive rating. In a head-to-head race, she's now beating Trump with black voters, 18 to 34-year-olds, women, independents, and importantly, white voters with a college degree. She's leading by 28 points on which candidate would protect immigrants' rights, by 21 points on abortion, by 20 on which candidate has the necessary mental and physical health to be president, by 16 who has the right temperament to be president, and by 9 points on which candidate represents change. For his part, Trump leads by 21 points on who would best secure the border, by 9 points on who would do best on the economy, and by 8 points on who would better deal with the cost of living. Improved numbers for Harris, but with the economy and cost of living the most important issues to voters in the poll, it's the reason the race remains close. But even with all that data, what we're seeing on the Republican side is not just a weird lack of actual campaigning in swing states like Michigan, where Republicans are complaining that there are basically no Trump-Vance campaigners, and this warped mass campaign to demonize immigrants from seemingly randomly picked non-white countries, Haiti, Venezuela, and now Trump has added the Congo, plus a MAGA push to simultaneously radicalize Puerto Rican voters and black men against VP Harris and for Trump. What we're seeing is this clear campaign among Republicans to convince their base voters not that Trump is destined to win, but that if he doesn't win, it will be because non-citizens somehow flooded the polls to vote for Harris. Despite the fact that immigrants know almost nothing about how anything in our system works, they are supposedly being corralled into the voting booth by Democrats or by the Jews to vote for Democrats. And for the Republican base, increasingly, it seems that the only way they would trust the results of any election is if every single voter enters the voting booth with armed white Christian poll watchers stopping, frisking, and interrogating them, and then writing their vote on a little slip of paper, which is then counted by hand and maybe, I don't know, handed back to the armed white Christian soldiers. And even then, only after each voter registers to vote by hand delivering their original birth certificate, no copies, plus a driver's license and a passport to the voter registrar with no discrepancy at all between the names on each of those documents. By the way, that part about the birth certificates and the documents is what's literally in the SAVE Act, the bill Republicans named as a must-pass part of the legislation to fund the government and not shut it down. And here's the hitch that some eagle-eyed journalists spotted. Those rules would eliminate from the voting rolls possibly millions of married women whose names on their birth certificates most certainly do not match the name on their driver's license or passport because of how marriage usually works. People often, change their surname to their husband's last name. So in those cases, women voters would have to also have a marriage certificate. They'd have to produce that and give it to the voter registrar, or whatever other maximum proof Republican-based voters deem necessary. Also, I wonder how J.D. Vance, whose birth certificate says James Donald Hamel, how would he be eligible to vote if the SAVE Act passed? Anybody thought that through? Between all of that and the frenzy to register new voters, particularly young voters who are signing up in massive numbers, according to Vote.org, particularly since Taylor Swift endorsed Kamala Harris, but are notoriously difficult to poll, and the aggressive move by Republican state parties and governors in red states and swing states to purge tens of thousands, and in the state of Texas, more than 1 million voters as fast as they can register, with conservative groups even suing local counties to try to remove voters from the rolls in up to 19 states. We are clearly in for a long and bumpy 43 days. And joining me now to help disaggregate all of our emotional stress and is our terrific Monday panel, Tim Miller, writer at large for The Bulwark and host of the Bulwark podcast, Simon Rosenberg, political strategist and author of the Hopium Chronicles on Substack, and Don Calloway, Democratic strategist, founder of the National Voter Protection Action Fund and host of the Caucus Room podcast. Everybody's doing podcasts and all these wonderful things. I'm going to go right down the middle to Simon. Let's go through these polls. You're the Hopium guy, so let us know whether we should be hopeful or just read the New York Times Siena poll in despair, because they pretty much seem to be calculated to make you despair. NBC News poll. Positive views of Harris, she's now 48-45. The NBC News poll, her advantages among black voters, voters 18 to 34, women independents, and crucially white voters with a college degree by 21. And then this key issues poll. She's leading on protecting immigrant rights, abortion, mental and physical health to be president, temperament, change, and Trump goes with border and the other things. And then one more I'll throw in, the Hispanic numbers. There's been a lot of despair about and worry and concern about Harris being scoring softer with Hispanics than Biden did. She's creeping up in that. What do these polls tell us, if anything, about where things really stand with 43 days to go?
Yeah, I would much rather be us than them. I mean, I think we've gained, she was already in a better position than Donald Trump before the debate. I think the debate did change things a point or two in her favor, and she's running in most polls. And I will say there are some polls showing something different, but in most polls, she's hovering around Biden 2020 numbers now, both at the national level and in the key states. And so where I think the race is now is we're in a much better position than them, but we're not still where we want to be. And we still have work to go do together to make sure that we win this election, because Biden 2020 was really close. And we don't want this election to be as close as the 2020 election. But we have momentum. We have a far better candidate. We've got a stronger argument. And I think something you alluded to, Joy, in your run-up, is that we also have enormous financial, organizational enthusiasm advantages, and obviously much bigger crowd sizes. And so I think all that together means that as we go through these next 43 days, I think it's more likely we win than them, but we still have an awful lot of work to do.
Right. And Don, the thing about our kooky election system is that Democrats are built to win the popular vote. It's very hard for Republicans to win it because they have such a narrow coalition that's almost monoracial. It's not completely monoracial, but it's close to it. But Democrats have to win the popular vote, conversely, by an enormous spread in order to carry the Electoral College. So Hillary Clinton can win by 3 million and lose, and, Joe Biden can win by 5 million and win, and President Obama, he won by 10 and then 5. So there is still a lot of nervousness. And one of the things that's making a lot of folks nervous is this aggressiveness to pull folks off the voter rolls. Mm-hmm. It's been super aggressive on the part of Republican governors and secretaries of state. So how concerned are you that all of these eager registrars, including young people, are actually going to have their right to vote enforced?
Well, I think that everyone who is watching the democratic process should be extraordinarily concerned about that. And the reality is that part of civic participation baked in going forth, particularly from groups on the left, has to be aggressive voter protection. And we focus so much on registration and then get out the vote, but we've done nothing really substantially as a writ large party organization over the last 15 to 20 years, since we've been running diverse candidates, by the way, which we need to actually hold these offices. We've done nothing to protect the actual votes that will be cast. Yep. But this should be a golden rule. There's no universe in which changing voting procedures and rules 90 days before an election or within this window should be remotely legal. So whoever's ready to bring that as a federal lawsuit, I'm more than happy to help support it, because there's no universe in which people can be educated about how to vote in time now when you're making rules changes. It's blatant voter suppression at its most pernicious, and it's happening where we saw Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act taken away in Shelby versus Holder in 2013. So I love your show so much, but it's always important to pull all the way out and show that broader historical context of what's going on and how this is all connected 43 days before you could potentially elect a black woman president. So there are lots of procedural, substantive hurdles between right now and the ballot box.